Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to the last presentations of the day. This is Stream 3 of CrimCom. We'd like to welcome everyone. We have 3 groups today that will be presenting. They will introduce themselves to you. The order that we will present will be the order that is in the program. Each presenter will have 10 minutes to present their information, and we will save questions until the very end. So if you have questions, do feel free to type who the question is for and your question, and I'll field those to the panelist at the end. So we have up first, we have Beth Steinert, and she is going to present, and you are good to go.
All right, good afternoon. You can hear me okay,
Yes.
Bobby? All right,
Yes.
Great. As Bobby indicated, my name is Beth Steinert. I work for the Virginia Department of Juvenile Justice, and I am very pleased and honored to be here this afternoon and to get us started with the 4 o'clock block of stream number 3. The workshop is going to provide an overview of the Virginia Department of Juvenile Justice's efforts in transforming our system and building a more robust continuum of services, implementing evidence-based and evidence-informed practices and programs, services statewide. You're primarily going to hear from our partners with Child Trends, Case Commons, and Vanderbilt University as we shine a light on how we have used a combination of internal but also external expertise and leverage consultant and researcher practitioner relationships to promote and accelerate our reforms. But prior to turning over to our 3 primary speakers, I have been asked this afternoon to provide an overview of our transformation journey at the Virginia Department of Juvenile Justice to ensure that you have some context. So nearly 5 years ago, our agency began on a journey at the Department of Juvenile Justice and set out to rethink how Virginia responds to court-involved youth. We knew that our system was overly reliant on secure detention, incarceration, and punishment. And we knew that with the right reforms and investments that we could transform into a system of rehabilitation, personalized treatment, and community supports. So in 2016, our agency designed and released a transformation plan to realign and reallocate resources to a wider array of rehabilitative services. Our plan aimed to use evidence-based practices to more effectively serve youth, their families, and communities, and centered around 3 core operational strategies that you see here on the screen: reduce, reform, and replace. We set out to reduce the use of juvenile correctional centers by transforming our intake, probation, and commitment practices, including introducing more structured decision-making tools and reforming our length of stay policies. And I think you're going to hear a little bit more about that. And we also sought to reform supervision, rehabilitation, and treatment practices for youth in custody, particularly implementing what's called the community treatment model that's modeled after the Missouri system. And finally, we sought to replace our large and what had become outdated juvenile correctional centers with support from a statewide continuum of alternative placements and evidence-based services that has included the development of public partnerships with local detention homes that you'll hear more about, as well as private partnerships with provider agencies. And then in addition to our reduce, reform, and replace, a new goal of sustain, we departed from our 3 R's, was later added to focus on continuing progress towards transformation goals, but with an emphasis on workforce and infrastructure. DJJ has increasingly become a learning organization, and we've used the savings to invest in resources such as training opportunities, leadership development, and building a quality assurance unit. And you're going to have the opportunity to hear a little bit about the activities of our quality assurance unit, as well as to meet our quality assurance manager, Andrea McMahon, who's on with us this afternoon as well. And so a little bit more on reduce, reform, and replace. So while my time this afternoon with you is brief, and there are many things we could share about our practices that we're very proud about, I'm going to share the ones that I feel like are probably the most relevant to the other speakers that you're going to hear from. So first, in response to a significant decline in commitments to state care, our agency has closed 3 secure detention facilities since 2014 and began reallocating and reinvesting cost savings to develop a continuum of community-based services and alternative direct care settings across a broader spectrum of risk levels and treatment needs. Prior to 2014, our agency had spent a disproportionately large percentage of our budget to operate what had become outdated, oversized juvenile correctional centers, and that weren't producing the public safety outcomes that we desired. Our agency has also been reforming many of our court service unit practices, particularly those designed to reduce commitments to state care. And in a few of those examples, working to increase our use of diversion, introducing a standardized disposition matrix to provide guidance to probation officers when making what are hopefully more consistent and data-driven dispositional recommendations to the court, and adopting a statewide model of intervention called Effective Practices in Community Supervision, or EPICS. And you may be familiar with that. Essentially, we have taught our probation staff cognitive behavioral interventions that they can use during their probation and parole appointments. One of the particular reforms that I wanted to tell you a little bit more about, and you're going to hear about a process evaluation that Child Trends has taken the lead of us on for us, but we're proud of all of our reforms, but particularly wanted to tell you a little bit about what we call the adoption of a new service delivery model that we call the Regional Service Coordination Model, or RSC model. In late 2016, we developed a request for proposals and selected and hired 2 regional service coordination companies to support our agency in building a more robust statewide continuum of services, and particularly wanted their help with building out evidence-based and evidence-informed services. And so there were a few goals that we had in mind when we launched this new model. One was just to the sheer provider network, to expand the number of providers that we had statewide, as well as to expand the number of services that we had, to identify service gaps and to help us to ensure that we had basic services available statewide. We were concerned about disparities in access to services, and particularly concerned with what we call justice by geography. We wanted to ensure that service availability aligned with needs in particular areas and was not a matter of zip code. So that was one of our primary goals. We also sought to improve the quality of services and to ensure the availability of evidence-based and evidence-informed services, and to improve the quality of services by enhancing provider use of strategies designed to engage families and natural supports. We knew that we had some internal expertise, but did not have enough internal capacity to adequately and proactively monitor providers and services for compliance, for quality, and also for adherence to fidelity standards. And so these are just some of our results to date. Very proud to share some of these results with us. The Virginia juvenile justice system between 2010 and fiscal year 2019, so nearly the last decade, these are some of the results that we've been able to realize, some that predate our transformation. So we've been at this for a while. And so some of those—
You have 2 minutes left.
Thank you. So some of those reductions include a downward trend, decrease in juvenile intakes by more than 40%, new probation cases by more than 50%, types of secure confinement, including detainments and direct care, by 44%, an increase in our use of diversion plans, and a decrease in our 12-month rearrest rate. And in fact, our decline in our rearrest rate shows a decrease from 25% in fiscal year 2014 to 21% in fiscal year 2018, which translates into 850 fewer youth rearrested. A couple of the other quick things that I wanted to share in terms of results associated with our regional service coordination model. In terms of, I talked about availability of services. We now can proudly say that we have more than 140 unduplicated direct service providers statewide, and that those services provided by them have served more than 1,600 young people during the last fiscal year. We've also been successful through our regional service coordinators in expanding and implementing evidence-based models to include functional family therapy, FFT, and multisystemic therapy, MST, statewide. At the time of our initial launch, FFT was not available in Virginia, and MST was available in 2 jurisdictions. And now 3 years later, we have 14 FFT teams, FFT and or MST teams, and the combined reach of those teams is nearly every city and county in the state. We have 133 jurisdictions, so we're particularly proud of that. For the broader continuum, and some of these are through our regional service coordination model, and some are through partnerships with local detention homes, we're also very proud to say that in terms of access to alternative residential settings, there's also been a significant increase. There are now 47 non-correctional center options for youth, including community placement programs and detention reentry sites, residential treatment centers, and group homes. And of the 321 young people who were released from direct care during fiscal year 2020, 170 or 53% of those did not enter a juvenile correctional center.
Are you close to finishing up?
I am, yes, ma'am.
You've reached 10 minutes.
While we have much work, I should say, while we have much work that is ahead of us, our transformation journey continues, but we're proud of the results that we have to date. And we've benefited from a combination of internal and external support in our transformation that has helped us to realize the results that I just shared. Our outcomes have definitely been accelerated by a number of contracts and partnerships with researchers and consultants. And so I'm pleased for you to hear from 3 of them today, beginning with Kelly Murphy, I believe, from Child Trends.
We're going to have to maybe go a little shorter on some of the other ones since you went over, but I'll try to manage that. If we can quickly get the next person on, that would be great. We only actually had 3 panels scheduled, so you weren't technically on there for being a panel. So everyone else, you're going to have a little bit of reduced time. So if you can get through your material quickly.
Okay. Kelly, I think we talked about me going. Is that the question? Yeah. Okay. Great. And I will be quick. Is it?
You have to share your screen.
Slide showing up for you?
It is not.
All right, here we go. How's that?
Great. You got about 8 minutes.
Okay, I will be quick. Hi, I'm Barry Holman. I am a consultant for an organization called Case Commons, but funded exclusively by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and have been working very closely in Virginia since the middle of 2015 on their transformation process. Working at various levels, from in the locked facilities at the unit level up to coaching and consulting with the director and chief deputy for the organization. Mostly working on the residential and administrative sides, less so on the probation side. And if I can figure out how to move the slide. Okay, so what I'm going to talk a little bit about today are some of the assessments and changes that took place. Beth did a great job, and I'm glad she did that, to talk about some of the results and some of the things that have been put in place. I'm going to focus more on the cultural side of things that doesn't often get a lot of attention when we talk about change, but was absolutely imperative for Virginia. And my hope is at the end that Andrea, Beth, and I don't know if Jesse's with us or not, might be able to talk some more specifics about the areas that they've been involved in. No. Let's try this one. Okay, so to start off, the Casey Foundation, as I said, has been very involved and supportive of the transformation process in Virginia, starting when Andrew Block became the director of the agency. And in fact, the very first assessment from the head of the Juvenile Justice Strategy Group at the Annie E. Casey Foundation was about the commitment at the agency level, but also at the gubernatorial level for undertaking the kind of transformation that Director Block wanted to explore and undertake. It requires very heavy commitment from the executive level leadership of the agency, requires some vision, but also requires that umbrella of authority from politicians to be able to protect leadership when there are bumps along the road, and also significantly when savings take place from closing facilities, as Beth talked about, to hold those dollars back from others getting a hold of them and reinvest them into the young people in the communities where they live. So these are a few of the assessments that took place early on with just a very short kind of key findings, explanations. I do want to say DJJ, starting out in Virginia, had really excellent research capacity. But frankly, it was undervalued and really underutilized at the planning and at the day-to-day line management level. Some of the external assessments that took place were an assessment of the population dynamics that showed a lower than expected effect on the population even before they started transformation in 2015. So as Beth said, they knew there were more young people who were locked up, being locked up for a longer period of time. Also extensive racial and ethnic disparities in their system prior to this. A length of stay impact analysis was conducted with the department and the Casey Foundation, and that showed not unexpectedly that the longer the length of stay, the more problems there were, the higher the recidivism rate for young people, controlling for other factors, and the higher institutional violence and victimization that was occurring. Also showed that length of stay was skewed against young people of color. An important assessment that took place early as well was conducted by the Vera Institute, and that was a survey of youth who were in DJJ facilities. And that was really important for a number of reasons. It showed the youth perspective about what was happening in those facilities, what they felt, how they felt safe, how they didn't feel safe, what they valued about staff, where they felt like the staff or the processes that were in place didn't serve them. It also showed what their priorities were, and importantly, that they had hope for themselves, which was really important when talking with leaders and politicians, to show that while these young people had gotten caught up in the system, some of them for very serious and significant crimes, that they had hopes and they had dreams for their future, and they needed the adults with the power and the ability to make changes to help them reach those, to take that step. And it gave them a voice and gave them agency later on. The Missouri Youth Services Institute also did an assessment of the correctional practices, which showed a very adult-oriented correctional model, heavily medicalized model as well, and gave some recommendations for future change. And then it wasn't one analysis, but a number of observations that myself and others did about the culture at DJJ that showed a culture that was really focused on meeting the requirements of the floor. Do they pass mandatory audits? Are they in regulatory compliance? Are they doing the outputs that they're supposed to produce in terms of having the meetings and committees? And they were very heavy on meetings and committees, but not being results oriented at that time. And then another aspect of the culture was extreme silos in management. So not a lot of leadership sharing. One executive leader early on told me there were 4 things that guided their decision making: state law, state regulations, policies, and procedures. And everything they needed to do their job as an executive could be gathered from one of those 4 sources. And I thought that was really indicative of the greater culture across much of the agency. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the structural evolution, and I use the word evolution because it is still in progress. DJJ's been at this for about 5 years, and they've made great gains, as Beth showed, that can be quantified, but there's still work to do, and the work will actually never end. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from the cultural change here. As Beth said, they wanted to create a learning environment and become a learning organization. So some of the key things out of this list, as Beth said, one is creating practice improvement coaches. Okay, creating practice improvement coaches to really help with both evidence-based practices, but also other practices to help the staff have the support they need to do the work on a day-to-day basis. And another very important one is standing up a quality assurance department that didn't come from an audit and certification perspective, but came from a continuous quality improvement perspective. And again, Andrew McMahon hopefully can talk a little bit about that. All right, so the cultural evolution, Beth talked about a learning organization. They implemented a series that continue on to this day, executive listening sessions to go out in the field and hear from people directly. And these are the executive staff doing that. Implemented some leadership sharing to break down those silos. Management lines still exist, but shared leadership has become a more common practice. Youth and family engagement has been undertaken in a serious and significant way and is still being worked on to improve. And then that person I talked about who had those 4 manuals on her bookshelf at the executive level to guide all her decisions now starts most of her planning meetings with, yes, we have audits, yes, we have laws, yes, we have policies and procedures. But what really determines our direction is that we have a North Star and that we know where we're going. And that North Star for them, in addition to reduce, reform, replace, and sustain, is a strategic framework that they try to view every decision and policy through and practice that asks for young people and adults, is it safe? Does it improve connection between people? Is there purpose behind it? And is it fair?
Okay, great. We'll move on to the next presenter.
Great.
If you can unshare your screen and she can share hers.
I also wanted to note that Gabrielle, another presenter, is having trouble getting back in.
I'm working on it with the admin.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Stop share. There we go.
Great, thank you. It's the only way I could get her out with her screen caught, and now we're trying to figure out how to get her back in.
I think it's still having you share your screen, Barry.
Great, there we go.
Good?
Yep.
Thanks.
All right, Kelly, you're up.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelly Murphy, and I am a Deputy Director in the Youth Development area at Child Trends, a nonprofit mission-driven research center dedicated to improving the lives and prospects of children, youth, and families. And I'm delighted to be here discussing our partnership with DJJ. But before we get underway, I just want to acknowledge our funder, the National Institute of Justice, and give the disclaimer that the findings and opinions we're sharing today are our own. I also wanted to express gratitude to the various members of my team who can't be here today, as well as the DJJ team, because this has definitely been a group effort. So since we only have 10 minutes today, I'm just going to give a high-level overview of our evaluation approach and share some very preliminary findings. And since the findings are still kind of early on and a work in progress, I want to focus more on the collaborative process that we and DJJ undertook to produce them. and then we'll end with a brief discussion of next steps. So the overarching goal of our evaluation is to provide meaningful feedback and recommendations to DJJ, as well as other juvenile justice systems interested in implementing similar reform efforts. And to achieve this goal, we have 4 complementary objectives. Engage DJJ as an active partner throughout the evaluation, conduct a process evaluation to understand the extent to which the RSC model is being implemented as intended, and provide an initial assessment of how the RSC model is associated with youth outcomes, and then translate and disseminate the findings to targeted audiences. So I really think having DJJ as a partner has been just as important as any other part of the evaluation. So I just wanted to take a moment to give some examples of what that has looked like so far. So early on in the evaluation, we met extensively with DJJ to get feedback on the research questions driving the study, identify the important stakeholder groups that should be included in the evaluation, as well as begin to identify both how DJJ is hoping to use the evaluation findings, as well as the anticipated audiences for those findings. And DJJ also provided feedback on our qualitative protocols. They help support participant recruitment, and we've also held biweekly meetings where we met to troubleshoot challenges that have arisen, as well as discuss preliminary findings. And we found that these discussions around the preliminary findings have been particularly useful since DJJ often can provide additional context, and we can really co-create recommendations for improving their implementation of the model. So we have far too many research questions to list on one slide, but briefly, our questions fall into 4 dimensions of implementation. So first we have adherence, which focuses on the extent to which the model is being implemented as intended. So for example, here we'll examine whether DJJ is serving the population of youth they intended to serve under this model. We'll also be looking at how the YAZI DJJ's risk and needs assessment is being used to develop case plans. In terms of responsiveness, which is the focus of today's talk, we'll be examining the extent to which services being provided actually align with the needs of youth. And for dosage, we'll be exploring what service dosage looks like, focusing on different service packages or constellations of different service types, the amount of time youth are enrolled in services, and whether or not youth actually complete services. Although we feel like it's a little too early on in the implementation of the model to conduct a formal impact evaluation, we will conduct some exploratory analyses examining how things like service dosage is associated with youth outcomes. And then finally, across all of these areas, we'll be exploring whether there are differences related to race, gender, and urbanicity. So our project is a 5-year evaluation, which began in late 2017. And as I alluded to earlier, we have a mixed methods approach that includes qualitative data collection from a variety of stakeholders, including the regional service coordinators, probation officers, youth, judges, and direct service providers. In addition, we're really fortunate that DJJ has been able to provide us with a wealth of administrative data that's really not commonly found in juvenile justice systems. For example, DJJ has been working with the regional service coordinators to develop a database to track youth outcome, to track youth referrals, the outcomes of the referral, the name of the service that they were referred to, and the start and end dates of their service enrollment. So as I mentioned earlier, a focus of this project is understanding the extent to which services youth are expected to participate in actually align with their needs. And to assess this, we pulled data from the YAZI that was administered the closest to a youth referral to the RSC model. And this YAZI data includes a list of up to 3 priority areas for intervention that were identified by a youth probation officer based on the results of the YAZI and their own professional judgment. And on a side note, we intend to look at the alignment of these identified priority areas and the results of the YAZI, but for today's talk, we're really just focusing on the 3 identified priority areas. And then in addition to the YAZI data, we pulled the service provision data that I just mentioned. So to complete this analysis, however, we really needed to figure out a way to link the individual services, including name brand evidence-based programs like multisystemic therapy, as well as more generic services like individual counseling, to the 9 different YASI need domains. So to do so, we created what we like to refer to as our crosswalk between the different service names and the YASI domains. So as you can see in this example, we listed all the different services youth are referred to in rows and the YASI domains that each service targets in columns. And to fill it in, we first looked to the program logic models, including both those published in line for the brand name programs, and as well as the logic models produced by the direct service providers in collaboration with the regional service coordinators. And we then refined this crosswalk iteratively with DJJ until it was at a place that we were both comfortable with. And then we presented it to the regional service coordinators who are currently reviewing it and updating it based on their knowledge of the direct service providers that they work with. So we then took this crosswalk and used it as a key to recode the service participation data so we could identify whether youth participated in a program that actually addressed their need. And when assessing the responsiveness of services, we're interested in looking at both the individual youth level to see things like the percent of youth matched at services that address their needs and the need areas that were the most and least likely to be addressed through service referrals. We're also interested in looking at service matching geographically, as one of the goals of the RSC model is to address service gaps. And so to do so, we linked the data on youth top needs to court service units or CSUs that their case originated from. And then we created a web scraping tool to pull data from the provider registries on the regional service coordinators' websites to obtain a universe of DJJ approved providers. We then used our crosswalk and coded whether each provider could address a need domain. And then we used all of this data to create heat maps that could identify hotspots of youth needs as well as areas where there were service deserts. So given that we're still working on finalizing our crosswalk tool, I'll focus on the community level findings since the individual level findings are likely to change. So here's a screenshot of our mapping tool, and you'll note at the top that a user can select an area of need, so individual maps can be created for each of the 9 different YASI priority areas. And here we have an example for the employment and free time domain. So the green map shows the amount of youth with an employment and free time need that was identified by their probation officer by each CSU in the state. And the darkest shades of green represent the CSUs with the highest density of youth with that need identified, and the lightest shades represent the CSUs with a lower density of the youth with that need.
There are 2 minutes left.
Great. Then the blue map on the left shows the density of available programs to address that specific need, where areas with more providers are shaded in darker colors and areas with fewer providers are shaded in lighter colors. And our hope was to combine the map of youth need with the map of providers to identify CSUs where there was gaps in services. However, we quickly realized, thanks to Beth's astute feedback, that there's kind of wide variability in providers' capacity to serve youth. So for example, one service provider who has the capacity to serve 5 youth is not really the same as a provider who can serve 50. And because of that, we can't confidently say that the number of providers equals the amount of slots available for youth to participate in. So we took this challenge to the regional service coordinators to think through the best way to address this issue. And the solution that we're currently exploring is whether we can create some sort of proxy based on the number or proportion of youth who are actually not matched to a service that addressed a particular need they had. So for example, the number of a youth in a given CSU that had an employment need identified as an area for intervention, but then they weren't actually linked to a service that could address that need. So unsurprisingly, our next steps are to update the crosswalk with the RSC's feedback and then develop the proxies for service gaps at the CSU level. And then to obtain and clean a new data pool from DJJ in January that includes data through the end of the 2020 calendar year, which will enable us to explore how the COVID-19 pandemic affected usability to access services. We're also working with DJJ to explore the possibility of making our interactive mapping tool public facing on DJJ's website and then adding some features such as a search feature that lists the names of providers that address a given need area to aid in probation officers in their case planning. And then beyond that, we'll be very busy this next year or so, finishing up our qualitative data collection and beginning to analyze the quantitative data related to some of our other implementation domains.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelly. And we'll switch it over now to Gabrielle to finish us out.
All right, I'm on the phone. I got removed early in the meeting, but couldn't return. So I've called in, and I think Beth or Kelly are going to advance my slides.
Okay,
I
apologize.
have access to
We have fixed it, but I don't know if it's taking
Yeah,
an effect this time. So we'll work with the technology.
indeed. I restarted twice.
This
Great.
is what we do.
Thank you so much. I appreciate Kelly or Beth or whoever's doing this. I really appreciate it. This is Gabrielle Chapman. I wanted to kind of come up on the back end. I'm the new kid on the block, or SPEP. My model with Mark Lipsey is. If you'd advance the slide for me. Just what I want to talk about today is a real quick drill down into what, first of all, what this SPEP is, why, how it aligns with the existing reform, all these great things that you just heard about, and how we're actually moving the implementation process forward despite or in the face of COVID, and then really quickly to next steps. Next slide. So the what, next slide again. We have the SPEP. It's the Standardized Program Evaluation Protocol. I'm going to give you a few little bits and pieces of information about it so that you understand what it is, what the SPEP is, and what the process is, or at least generally speaking, before I focus on the Virginia implementation context. First of all, the SPEP is a sustainable performance improvement process for intervention services received by justice-involved youth with the intent on recidivism reduction. It uses Mark Lipsey's meta-analytic database of over 700 experimental and quasi-experimental studies covering the time periods from 1950 to 2014. And actually, we're updating now through 2020. I'm very excited about that update. But and I actually coded on this thing, on this database when I was in grad school and used it as my dissertation. So now it's the backbone of the model and process that I implement. So it's kind of been an exciting trip and path with SPEP. Mark started, that Mark Lipsey it is, started compiling the database in the 80s, the late 80s, way back then, and then created this evidence-based scoring model in the early 2000s. He worked in 2 states where it was validated, and then I joined Mark when he went into his 3rd state in 2008, and I created the SPEP process and the performance improvement lifecycle training and other implementation materials. Next slide. A couple things about the SPEP, and just keep advancing if you would. The SPEP uses research-based evidence to drive changes needed for reform. It uses a rating scheme to compare services in situ, meaning what the kids are getting, where they're getting it, with research evidence for that specific service type. It provides evidence-based recommendations for service optimization relative to recidivism reduction capability. It is a continuous performance improvement process for both homegrown and brand name services and programs. Both groups are included. And it leverages what's currently working to support and strengthen existing best practice. We designed it to be used by government entities in partnership, and that point is highlighted on purpose, in partnership with private and nonprofit providers, all the while building and reinforcing a climate of, and you can click those 3 pillars, what we refer to as the practice pillars of SPEP. Those are actually pillars outside the building in my former office, but they are partnership, education, and transparency. And the idea here is that we are not an audit. We're not yet another audit tool. What we're doing is building and changing more specifically optimizing services as they exist so that they get closer to what we know to be best practice and to maximize recidivism reduction of a particular service based on research evidence. Okay, next slide. So the SPEP process is not a one and done. As you can see for the life cycle, and you can go ahead and just click one more time. You know, my pillars will come up. There you go. It is a sustainable performance improvement tool and process. And what I'd like to do is just kind of very briefly kind of go through the cycle here. We start, if you would click, with a data collection. That's again, what the kid is getting. The exact service, not just the name, but what the kid is actually getting, including this very specific content, and getting information, service type, quality, quantity, and risk information related to the child in that service and the service itself. We then move to the next item on the cycle, where we looked and see, based on the data that we gathered, how does this particular service, as it's being delivered, to whom it's being delivered, compared to what we know from research evidence to be the best that it can possibly be in terms of recidivism reduction. We then move down to then discussion and feedback, feedback reports that we share with providers. So we do this, government entities again do this in conjunction and collaboration with providers or program managers in terms of what do we do now that we've matched it to what we know we can do in terms of research and optimize it. How do we optimize it? What are the steps we take? Which gets us to the next step, which is partnered improvement planning. Working together, not just on the provider, not just on the government contractor, but both folks, both groups, and many more in lots of circumstances. Partnered improvement planning. We know and we have seen many situations where it's not one group's fault that it's not just the provider's fault that the child isn't getting the full dosage. It could be very well that the referral it took so long for the child to be referred that probation was over and there weren't enough weeks for them to complete the service. Maybe government is sending the low-level kiddo to a highly intensive program. All these other kinds of issues can come up. So putting all the people together so that we can have a holistic approach to improvement. And then finally, at that targeted improvement and communication, always communication. This is what we're trying to do. These are recommendations that came out from this process, and this is what we were able to accomplish. This is what we had trouble accomplishing. And then we start one more time back up again with the next, going back to data collection. So let's see, we made these improvements. How has this affected our SPEP score? So then we go to the why. Yes, please. And you can advance it beyond that to the next page, one of my very favorite pictures. If you assume SPEP is that lovely little place set up there with the palm tree and the shiny the shiny slides, that's all well and good, right? It looks lovely, but its base is not really conducive to safe child play. And I use this to show that you can't just add SPEP and stir, so to speak. And you can't add any reform initiative. The work that Barry talked about, the work that Kelly talked about, and all the other work that Virginia has taken on. You can't just add that without planning, proper implementation, and alignment. You won't be in a good situation, and you're going to set yourself up for both short and long-term failure. So the next slide, please. So from a SPEP perspective, let me tell you a little bit about alignment with existing reform. From a SPEP perspective, Virginia, when we came in, it's a state that has proven readiness for SPEP. They have a commitment to reform, they have staff bandwidth, they've got data availability and systems with a precedent for data-based decision-making. They have a validated risk assessment and quality assurance framework. So they were SPEP ready. That doesn't happen all the time, and we were thrilled about this. But from a Virginia perspective, where do we fit? Well, I think, and I'm going to spend the rest of this talk discussing this and pointing out that SPEP really aligns very nicely, somewhat perfectly, actually. It aligns and reinforces on a myriad of levels.
About 2 minutes.
Oh my goodness. And I'm going to talk about that next. In terms of what I'd like to additionally point out, that the assessment work that Barry had spoke about that revealed an underutilization of research, that DJ's Day's response and initiative to make research relevant to mission and management needs, that's really a parallel to what SPEP is designed to do. It's a tool and process that's designed to translate research into practice. So as I said, Virginia is very, very SPEP ready, right? And we're all nicely aligned in terms of mission, starting back with the transformation plan in 2016, reallocation of resources to increase focus on intervention services for justice-involved youth. Through this initiative and the ones that followed, regional service delivery model that was discussed earlier, the SPEP key components, what's needed to produce a SPEP rating, have all been actively developed and or improved by Virginia. So we're looking at service type, quality, quantity, risk. We consider those our key components. And through reduce and replace, that Beth, I'm sure, talked about. I wasn't unfortunately on the call, but I'm sure she talked about that. The service continuums, the reinvested funding in training and tracking, regional service coordination model, identification of service gaps. All these things have helped us and put us in a wonderful position in terms of identifying what the kids are getting in terms of quality. The Virginia folks, through the reforms that you've heard about, actually set up a really strong quality assurance unit to build capacity and monitor provider compliance. There's lots and lots of strong evaluation strategies. I'm sure Kelly talked to you about that. In terms of quantity, how much of the service a kid is getting, which is one of our key components. There's all these valid data systems, access, as well as the fact that dosage is being examined as part of the multifaceted evaluation process that Kelly spoke about, which also greatly benefits from the data collection and MIS policy process modifications that Barry talked about. Finally, we have risk with recidivism risk level of a kiddo that we need to know for SPEP. It's a validated assessment, and the YAZI they use, and it's even been being evaluated with the work that Kelly does. I'm going to skip ahead to the very end, if I could.
We've got to end this whole thing in 2 minutes, so you're not going to have time for questions.
Oh, okay, then let's take questions.
You can pick and choose as the group, since you're all from the same agency. You can pick whichever one you'd like to do. I don't have any questions currently, so if any of the participants have a question, otherwise you can finish out the last couple slides you have.
Okay, just using this Fixon et al. Triangle of implementation drivers. We have the staff competence is what we were working on as we hit COVID, and then there's the organizational supports and leadership. COVID would be an implementation killer if it wasn't for the existing reform culture and all the work that's been done and come before SPEP, and the fact that SPEP aligns so much with what has already been done. It has been it has allowed us to continue on, be innovative. That's what those little light bulbs are, to be incredibly innovative, and the adaptive nature of the leadership that is in Virginia has allowed us to even include some cross SPEP states. My training in terms of peer training, my master trainers in Pennsylvania worked with the Virginia SPEPers in terms of that coaching piece on the staff compliance side, and also have been direct peer mentors in leadership.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it up there. If you have a slide that has the contact information, I'm sure if people have questions, they can contact your agency directly. I don't know if you do or not.
I don't on this stack.
That's okay. We didn't ask for that anyway. I just want to say thank you to the presenters, to your agency. It looks like you're doing some really good work out there. We're really excited to see your research. Thank you to the participants that are coming. As we all know, all of our conferences have been canceled recently, so it's nice to have this as a way we can still continue on and do some of this good work. I appreciate everyone coming, and if you have any questions, again, you can look at the program and find their agency and their names, and feel free to contact them directly. Thank you, everyone.